When you are using a quotation from a dictionary, you are actually appealing to an authority, and it's really not an artistic means of persuasion. It's not any kind of discussion. You're saying, this panel of people decided that this word meant that. Are definitions important? Indeed they are. Some of the Platonic dialogues are all about how you define something such as, for example, courage. What does that mean? So definitions, etymology, yep. I list a few other. Description, example, Katie?
You can provide context in a sort of illustrative or imaginative way. I'm thinking sort of how, in Common Sense, I think it was Common Sense, he was talking about society and government, and then goes on to provide a sort of imaginative or illustrative scenario and uses those terms.
Yes, yeah. Yes. You can actually paint a little short vignette to help. You give a contextual definition, and that's perfectly possible. So all of those are ways in which you can define something. You can also do something which Aristotle recommends, which is, if you're talking about a particular thing or a particular quality, might it belong to a larger group of things or a larger group of qualities? Might it be, as it were, a subset or an individual item in a larger set? It might be. And that might help understand what its qualities are. So it's a matter of classification to some extent. How do you classify this? How do you classify what kind of constitution a certain government has? What kind of government does it produce? Does it produce a government of 3 branches, such as the United States government? Or maybe it is a monarchical government, which is absolutist and so forth. That doesn't mean you're defining what absolutism is necessarily, or you're not necessarily defining what those 3 branches are, but you are explaining the difference between things in a class. Do a lot of countries, or did a lot of countries once have a monarchical government? Indeed they did. But not all monarchical governments are created equal. Great Britain has a monarchical government. Is it the same as all monarchical governments in the world? No, it's not. It has a much more mixed constitution, much to the chagrin of Thomas Paine in Common Sense, who says it makes no sense to have this kind of mixed government that Great Britain has. It's a historical accident, and we should not be bound by it. So Paine uses definition. When you come to read Common Sense, you'll see how he uses definition to point out what he regards as the insufficiencies of a British way of governing, which he believes must be overthrown, because it makes no sense. It is not common sense. If you had to sit down and invent a government from scratch, you would not do what the British have done. You wouldn't do it. So his argument is, why should we in North America live under such a government? So in studying logos, or reasoning, it is helpful to look at several kinds of verbal formulations. Does everyone know the difference between verbal and oral? What is the difference between verbal and oral? Misused very often in the public press and in the media. But there is a difference. What's the difference between verbal and oral? Yeah, verbal means just words. Oral means spoken. So occasionally you will hear people say, well, we had a verbal agreement. My neighbor said that he wouldn't cut down that tree. Well, technically that's not a verbal agreement. That's an oral agreement. And so in law, you speak of an oral contract, a contract which is established merely by speaking. A verbal contract, a verbal statement, simply means in words. Now, can it sometimes mean oral? Yes. But you really should be precise. If you mean it's oral, say oral. That's what it means. Oral means using words. So, in thinking about forms of reasoning, whether orally or verbally in writing, it's helpful to look at certain forms. If you all take a good look at that reading in Classical Rhetoric for the Modern Student, you plow through those pages. Was it crystal clear to all of you? It's hard, a little bit of it, especially if you're not used to it. So I want to go over a few examples today because they're very important. You will encounter them every day. We've already encountered them in a lot of the reading we have done. So let's slow down just a little and look at some of these. The simple syllogism. This has been around for a couple thousand years as well. How many of you have studied syllogisms before? Anyone? In geometry or where?
Logical reasoning.
Oh, no, you have. Logical reasoning course. Good. Philosophy and reason. All right, so we may call on you for some expert advice on syllogisms because you have to get used to them a little, right? Okay? If you haven't actually studied them formally, it takes a little getting used to. Let me give you a syllogism. First of all, can I have a volunteer who has really good handwriting on the blackboard? Anybody want to volunteer? And come up to the board and start on the left side and write just large enough so everyone can read it, because you'll have to do a little bit of dictation work here. So I'll read slowly. All rhetoric courses teach syllogisms. This is a major premise. First of all, let me ask you, is that true? Oh my goodness, that's wonderfully neat. That's script. All rhetoric courses teach syllogisms. Is that true? Do we know that that's true? No, we don't know it's true, but it's a major premise, okay? It's a major premise. As someone has put it down. You can contest a major premise. When we look at the Declaration of Independence, what does it say? Does it say these truths are self-evident? No, what does it say, Sam? We hold these truths to be self-evident, meaning we believe that these truths are self-evident. Now you can say, why do you have to say you believe that a truth is self-evident if it's self-evident? Right? Well, what Jefferson and his committee were doing were protecting themselves against the fact that someone might just say, your self-evident truth is not my self-evident truth. But everyone signing that document was saying, I too hold these truths to be self-evident. I mean, I affirm, I believe that these truths are self-evident. Okay, minor premise. Course X teaches syllogisms. Now, someone comes to the conclusion after seeing these two statements, a major and a minor premise. Someone comes to the conclusion, Course X is a rhetoric course. I'm going to ask you, is that a valid syllogism? No. Can someone in plain language explain why it is not a valid syllogism? What would be the reasoning behind that?
Because there could be courses other than rhetoric that also teach syllogisms.
Yeah, we just heard about a couple of them. A course in logic and a course in philosophy. You can have rhetoric teach it or not teach it. So this is an invalid syllogism. Okay? Now, we're not testing the truth value of it at this moment. So we could probably say, no, that's not necessarily true. Could it be true that Course X is a rhetoric course? Is that possibly true? Sure, it's possibly true, but we cannot conclude it. There's no certainty to it. There's no certainty to it. Now, Anna, let's erase all. Erase the word all. And let's put in only rhetoric courses teach syllogisms. Let's just accept that as a major premise. Only rhetoric course. Now you can say, oh no, that's not true. No, that's the premise though. That's what we're given. Only rhetoric courses teach syllogisms. Course X teaches syllogisms. Course X is a rhetoric course? Yes. Yes. Now it may help as you study syllogisms to do a little diagramming. Some people are more visual in their intelligence than others. Some people do it very well just in their head with words, but other people sometimes it's a help to have a visual prompt. So, here's the universe of courses that teach syllogisms. Are there any courses in here that aren't rhetoric courses? No. So, here's a course that teaches syllogism. Is it a rhetoric course if all of these are rhetoric courses? Yes, sure it is. Of course it is. Let's try another syllogism. Anna, we can move on. Yeah, maybe we'll have to go back and erase the first one now. All right. This one's a little corny, but bear with me. The moon is made of green cheese. First of all, we all know this is false, right? I hope we all know. I mean, they did recently discover water on the moon, and that shocked everyone, but science does change things from time to time. But we know that the moon is not made of green cheese. But here's the major premise. The moon is made of green cheese. Marty, M-A-R-T-I, Marty likes everything made of green cheese. What conclusion can we draw? Yeah, Marty likes the moon. Yep. The more you work with syllogisms, the more that you will discover that there are certain key words that you need to pay attention to, such as all, or none, or no, or every. And occasionally those words won't be there. So if you look in Corbett, I think on page 51 or something, it says, in reading the following syllogisms, assume that the word all is present before them. So if I said, for example, let's do another one, Anna. We got to, thank you, yep. This is extraordinarily neat handwriting. If I did it on the board, I would get low marks for media presentation in the Q score. They would. They used to grade you on Blackboard presentation. Do they still do that? Blackboard presentation. No, I think they've stopped doing that since PowerPoint came in. But the original Q guide graded all instructors on Blackboard presentation. No snakes have legs. Fish have no legs. And what if the conclusion stated was, fish are snakes? No, it's silly. We all know that's not true, of course. But sometimes it's easy to get caught up in certain kinds of arguments when the terms are unfamiliar to you. We're all familiar with fish and snakes. The first premise here, the major premise, is equal to saying all snakes have no legs. You must be careful whether a proposition is universal or particular. And that is a universal proposition. So is the second one. But the syllogism is invalid. Why is it invalid? They both have no legs. Why aren't they both the same?
It confuses a necessary and sufficient condition.
Yeah, very good. That's another thing we're going to talk about. You've already brought it up, necessary and sufficient. In other words, to be a snake, is it necessary that you have no legs?
Yes.
Yes.
But it's not sufficient.
It's not sufficient because there are other things that have no legs. Are fish and snakes the only animals that have no legs? No, there are many others. So you can't possibly begin to equate them. All right, let's try another one. Anna, thank you very much. You're doing really a stellar job here. Major premise. There is a group of animals that all have no legs. There is a group of animals that all have no legs. All fish belong to that group. Conclusion? All fish have no legs. Yeah. Now, as far as I know, scientifically, this statement is true. Someone's going to say, wait a minute, Professor Engel, there's a fish that has legs. And then you've got me. I know some fish have wings, and maybe some fish do have vestigial legs. I'm going to put that aside for a second. All right, let's do a couple others quickly, because I'm going to do these exercises in classical rhetoric for the modern student. Some people like ice cream. That store sells ice cream. The people in that store like ice cream. True? Not necessarily. Is it a valid syllogism? No, I don't think it's even valid. Here's a tougher one. All right, Anna, this is a tougher one. This is reminiscent of a lot of the things you may hear in the media these days. My political opponent didn't vote in the primary. It's a very specific statement. Let's assume it's true, okay? You're running for office, you've discovered that your political opponent did not vote in the primary. Minor premise. If someone doesn't vote, then that person isn't a good citizen. So let's stop right there. Sometimes in reading and writing, all you get are two elements of a syllogism. You may get just the major premise and the minor premise, or you may just get the minor premise and a conclusion, or you may just get the major premise and a conclusion. And what does the writer or the auditor then intend you as a reader or hearer to do? Fill in the blank. It's done all the time. And this is called, there's a technical word for it, it's called an enthymeme. And you will have run across this word in Corbett. It's a very important concept, an enthymeme. So let's go back to this particular example. What would be the conclusion that you would draw from this? Isn't a good citizen, right. My political opponent isn't a good citizen. That's a fairly damning thing to say. So let's go back to the beginning of this. Let's say it's factually true that the political opponent didn't vote in the primary. How would we know that? Yes, voting records. Are voting records a matter of public record? Yes, not whom you voted for, but whether you voted or not. No one can say whom you voted for. That's not a public record. That's why the voting booths have all these curtains around them, and you slip a ballot in. And in my town, you even have a protective secrecy sleeve you can use for your ballot as it feeds into a machine so nobody can catch quickly what circle you filled in. But it's a public record kept of whether or not you went to the polls. Your name is crossed off or checked or something when you go in, because you have had to register to vote. Your name is recorded as being registered, and then if you vote, they want to know, because, you know, why is that a good thing to know that you voted? Why is it a good public thing to know that a certain person has voted?
To avoid double counting.
Yeah, to avoid double counting. If someone else comes in and, you know, some identical twin who's not registered comes in and says, I'm so-and-so, and they say, oh, yes, you're registered. There are many old jokes in American politics about graveyards voting and things like that. But so, my political opponent isn't a good citizen. Is this a valid syllogism? No, Vinny, say no? No, why not?
It just says that if someone doesn't vote, not necessarily if they didn't vote in the primary, so the political opponent could have voted in the
yes,
general
that's
or
very
something.
tricky. Okay, so right here, I've got that in brackets in my notes. Let's insert, Anna, if someone doesn't vote in a primary, in the second one. No, not the brackets there, in the minor premise. Let's put in, if someone doesn't vote in a primary, then that person isn't a good citizen. Let's put that in. Let's complicate matters here. This is the way rhetoric works in practice, not fish or snakes, and snakes are fish. That's more elementary. Now, is this valid? Yeah, now it's valid. Is it true? Why did you shrug? You shrugged. Why might you suspect the truth value of this valid syllogism?